Robert Conrad's story didn't start in Hollywood luxury. No red carpets, no silver spoons. He was born Robert Conrad Falk in 1935, right in the middle of Chicago's unforgiving streets. His mother, Alice Jacqueline Hartman, raised him alone. No father figure, no safety net. Just the two of them trying to survive in a world that didn't care if they made it or not. Imagine a kid growing up in a city where toughness wasn't a choice, it was survival. Conrad's childhood wasn't filled with Hollywood dreams. It was filled with cracked sidewalks, broken homes, and the kind of raw grit that either breaks you or forges you into something unshakable. He wasn't born into money. He wasn't born into fame. He was born into the grind. Before anyone ever cheered his name, Robert was loading trucks in the freezing Chicago winters, delivering milk at dawn, swinging hammers at construction sites, all backbreaking jobs that taught him a truth he carried forever. Nobody hands you anything. You fight for it. And maybe that's why he carried that chip on his shoulder his entire life. It's why he never trusted Hollywood types, who came from privilege. He didn't see himself as one of them. He saw himself as a street fighter who just happened to stumble into show business. But that chip on his shoulder, it made him dangerous. It made him fearless. And it was the exact thing that would turn him into one of television's most unforgettable tough guys. Robert Conrad wasn't supposed to make it in Hollywood. He wasn't classically trained. He didn't have connections. What he had was raw muscle, piercing eyes, and an attitude that screamed, "I dare you to underestimate me." When he first landed in California, he was just another unknown face. He was working side jobs, anything to survive, while squeezing in acting lessons and stunt gigs. But here's the twist. His real advantage wasn't training. It was that he didn't play by the rules. While other actors were worried about image, Conrad was out there throwing punches, taking falls, and literally bleeding for roles that nobody else wanted. Producers noticed, Warner Brothers noticed, Hollywood had seen good-looking men before. But Conrad wasn't just another pretty face, he was dangerous, unpredictable, and real. In a town full of fakes, that stood out. Then came his breakout, Hawaiian Eye in 1959. As Detective Tom LaPaca, Conrad wasn't just acting cool, he was cool. Viewers could feel it. His street-born toughness slipped through the screen. Women loved him. Men wanted to be him. And TV executives realized they'd found a new kind of star. But make no mistake, Conrad didn't get here by playing nice. He wasn't Hollywood polished. He wasn't a studio puppet. He was a fighter, literally and figuratively. And he was just getting started. Because while Hawaiian Eye gave him a taste of fame, it was only the appetizer. The main course, the role that would turn him into a superstar, was just around the corner. And it would prove that Robert Conrad wasn't just another actor. He was a one-man revolution. By the mid-1960s, Robert Conrad wasn't just knocking on Hollywood's door, he was kicking it down. Then came the role that would make him a legend. James T. West in The Wild Wild West. And this wasn't your standard cowboy show. It was part Western, part spy thriller, part science fiction fever dream, and audiences ate it up. But the secret sauce wasn't just the crazy gadgets or wild plots. It was Conrad himself. Unlike other TV stars, Conrad wasn't content with stage fighting or carefully choreographed punches. He wanted real danger. He insisted on doing his own stunts, leaping off moving trains, crashing through windows, fist fighting until he was black and blue. He even broke bones while filming, and instead of quitting, he kept going. Fans didn't just watch James T. West, they believed him. Because in a way, Conrad was James T. West, and that reckless authenticity made him an icon. He wasn't Hollywood polished, he wasn't a studio puppet, he was raw, fearless, and unpredictable. In fact, he set the blueprint for every TV action hero that followed. Without Robert Conrad, you probably don't get Chuck Norris, Bruce Willis, or even Tom Cruise insisting on his own stunts. Conrad was the original tough guy. But here's the catch. That same fire, that same ego, and that same refusal to back down didn't just make him famous, it made him enemies. On screen, Robert Conrad and Ross Martin looked inseparable, the perfect team. West and Gordon, brains and brawn, disguise and danger, yin and yang. Fans adored their chemistry, but behind the cameras, it was war. Robert Conrad hated Ross Martin, and not just in a casual Hollywood, we don't get along way. This was deep, ugly, personal. Conrad thought Martin was everything wrong with Hollywood, too polished, too intellectual, too smug. Martin was classically trained, spoke multiple languages, quoted Shakespeare, and treated acting like an art form. To Conrad, the tough kid from Chicago who fought his way into the business, it all felt pretentious. He saw Martin not as a partner, but as a threat, and the tension was impossible to hide. Crew members whispered about it constantly. Scripts had to be rewritten to give Conrad more spotlight because he couldn't stand Martin, stealing scenes with clever disguises or sharp one-liners. In meetings, Conrad reportedly mocked him, dismissed his ideas, and made it clear he thought Martin was a fraud. The irony? Critics loved Ross Martin's acting. Fans loved his disguises. But to Conrad, every laugh, every compliment, every cheer for Martin was an insult. He wanted to be the sole star, and Martin's brilliance only fueled his rage. Even after the Wild Wild West ended, the bitterness didn't fade. When the cast reunited for TV movies years later, Conrad agreed only after ensuring he had control over the scripts. Anytime Ross Martin's name came up in interviews, insiders said Conrad's jaw would tighten, his teeth would grind. He couldn't let it go. And then, in 1981, Martin died unexpectedly from a heart attack. Most of Hollywood mourned. But Conrad? He never got closure. He carried that resentment to his own grave. To this day, some insiders say it was Conrad's most toxic and enduring feud, a private Cold War hidden behind the smiles of primetime television. Now here's the twist most people never saw coming. Behind all the brawls, the stunts, and the Hollywood ego, Robert Conrad was a family man, and not in a casual way. He took pride in it. He married his first wife, Joan Kenley, in 1952, before he was even famous. No spotlight, no Hollywood money, just 2 kids starting from scratch. Together they had 5 children, and for 25 years, they built a life that was surprisingly normal, considering Robert was one of TV's biggest stars. When their marriage ended in 1977, there were no screaming headlines, no ugly scandals. They stayed civil, even respectful, almost unheard of in Hollywood. But that same year, something happened that raised more than a few eyebrows. While serving as the MC at a teen beauty pageant, Conrad met a contestant, a strikingly young woman named Lavelda Fan. Despite being 25 years younger than him, sparks flew. A short time later, they were married. To the outside world, it looked like a scandal. A Hollywood star in his 40s marrying a teenager fresh out of pageant life? People whispered, people judged, but Conrad didn't care. They went on to have 3 children together, and against all odds, the 2 families blended shockingly well. His kids from his first marriage and his kids from his second acted like one big, tight-knit unit. In fact, some of them even worked with him on screen, like in High Mountain Rangers and Jesse Hawks. For Conrad, it wasn't just about starring in shows, it was about passing down his legacy through his children. To his fans, this revealed a whole other side of Robert Conrad. Beneath the fistfights and feuds was a man who, no matter what, made family his anchor. But even that strong foundation couldn't protect him from what came next. March 31st, 2003, a night that changed everything. Robert Conrad was 68 years old, driving his Jaguar through the Sierra Nevada foothills near his California home. But this wasn't another stunt scene from the Wild Wild West. This was real life, and it turned deadly. Conrad crossed the center line and slammed head-on into another car. Inside was 26-year-old Kevin Burnett, a young man with his whole future ahead of him. The crash was devastating. Kevin was left critically injured. Conrad himself was barely hanging on. When police arrived, the truth came out. Conrad was drunk. His blood alcohol level was over the limit. The Hollywood tough guy who once prided himself on discipline and control had made a reckless mistake, and now the whole world knew it. The fallout was brutal. Conrad was charged with felony DUI. He pled no contest, was sentenced to house arrest, forced into alcohol counseling, and slapped with 5 years probation. His once iron reputation took a massive hit, but the true tragedy came later. Kevin Burnett survived the crash, but the injuries never healed. The pain followed him everywhere, and just 2 years later, at only 28 years old, he died from complications his family believed were directly tied to that accident. For decades, Robert Conrad's image was untouchable. The tough guy, the stuntman, the real-life action hero. But after the 2003 crash, everything changed. The once invincible star was now battling pain every single day. The right side of his body was partially paralyzed, his nerves permanently damaged. For a man who built his reputation on physical strength, the humiliation was crushing. Imagine being the guy who leapt from speeding trains, who punched his way through TV history, now struggling just to move, and yet Conrad never completely disappeared. He hosted a radio show where fans could still hear that sharp wit and blunt honesty that made him famous. Sometimes he'd reflect on the glory days, other times he'd talk about his mistakes. Listeners say he never sugarcoated a thing. He was as raw behind the microphone as he had been in front of the camera. Still, his health kept declining. In his final years, Conrad became reclusive, rarely seen in public. On February 8th, 2020, the news broke. Robert Conrad had died of heart failure at 84 years old. Hollywood remembered him as the man who changed television. The first true action star, the guy who made danger look cool and masculinity look effortless. But the truth? His legacy is complicated. He left behind not just hit shows, but 8 children, grandchildren, and a family that, despite the chaos, remained close. A testament to the fact that for all his flaws, Conrad's anchor was always family. But there's one part of Conrad's story that still leaves a sour taste, and it's a feud that haunted him until his final breath. Ross Martin. On screen, the two were dynamite. Off screen, oil and water. Conrad thought Martin was pretentious, smug, too intellectual for his liking. Martin, on the other hand, kept things professional, never publicly firing back. But insiders knew the tension was real. Crew members remembered the icy stares, the bitter arguments, and even script rewrites to keep Martin from stealing scenes. For Conrad, it wasn't just dislike, it was obsession. He couldn't stand that critics praised Martin's disguises, his sharp delivery, his ability to outshine him with nothing more than a clever line or raised eyebrow. To Conrad, it felt like being upstaged on his own show, and if there was one thing Robert Conrad couldn't stand, it was being second to anyone. When Ross Martin died suddenly in 1981, most of Hollywood mourned. Conrad, he never got closure. The feud never ended. It just froze in time. He carried that bitterness with him for the rest of his life, like a scar that never healed. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Robert Conrad could outfight anyone. He could outstunt anyone. But he couldn't outrun his own demons. Robert Conrad wasn't perfect. He wasn't polished. He wasn't even always likable. He was fiery, stubborn, sometimes reckless, and he carried grudges like they were trophies. But maybe that's exactly why people loved him. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't a Hollywood creation. He was raw, real, and dangerous in a way no actor had ever been before. He bled for his roles, fought for his respect, and built a legacy on his own terms. Whether people liked it or not, yes, his life ended in tragedy. Yes, his demons caught up with him. But when you look back, Robert Conrad didn't just play tough guys. He was one, in every sense of the word. And maybe that's why decades later people still talk about him. Because in a town built on illusions, Robert Conrad was the one thing Hollywood rarely gives us. A man who lived, fought, and died, completely unfiltered.